Imagine your wife asking for a leave of absence from your marriage, so she can reconnect with an old flame. What would you do? Well, that's exactly what happened to Matthew Green. 30 years of marriage thrown into turmoil as his wife chases a high school romance. And let me tell you, this story takes some jaw-dropping turns you won't see coming. Did you ever hear that the typical high school romance usually fizzles out in about 3 weeks? Well, Catherine Mills and Greg Harris managed to beat those odds by sticking together for over 4 decades. Their story began when she was a freshman and he was a sophomore, and their connection seemed almost unbreakable. It was like their love had this timeless, enduring quality to it. But before you get too caught up in the nostalgia of this seemingly picture-perfect couple, I should clarify, Catherine and I were married for nearly 30 of those years, and I genuinely believed we were happy. Our marriage felt complete, and the arrival of our daughter, Jenna, only brought us closer. Those years. I was a content man. Just so you know, my name's Matthew Green, and Catherine has been my devoted wife for 3 decades. As for Catherine and Greg, their high school romance did come to an end, though just temporarily. After graduation, Greg took off to work on the Alaskan pipeline with his uncle, and that's where things started to go sideways. He pretty much stopped keeping in touch, leaving Catherine to navigate her senior year feeling pretty abandoned. She did date someone else briefly, but her heart was always with Greg. She waited around, playing the loyal girlfriend, while Greg, meanwhile, was busy enjoying his new life. He was living a kind of nomadic existence up there, apparently figuring that Catherine would just wait for him to make it big and sweep her off her feet once he returned. Of course, life doesn't quite work out like that. Time moves forward, and nothing ever stays frozen. Catherine eventually went to college, got her degree, and crossed paths with me at a party when she was 24. I was a few years older, 29, but we just clicked. I fell hard for her the moment I laid eyes on her, and I thought she felt the same way about me. Our relationship was pretty typical, really. The only hiccup came just before the wedding when a letter arrived 2 days before the ceremony, from Greg. Like some long-lost lover, he was finally coming back and wanted her to meet up with him. Thank goodness her mother stepped in, telling her that a new life was calling and to let go of that good-for-nothing, as she called him. Those were some tense days, and I was on edge, thinking she might actually call off the wedding. But in the end, Catherine went through with it and became Mrs. Catherine Green. By the time Greg finally showed up, it was too late, we were already off enjoying our honeymoon. In his despair, Greg went and enlisted in the Marines. After our honeymoon, we settled into our new life together. Catherine worked as a nurse, and I had my job as an underwriter at a large insurance company. It wasn't the most thrilling career, but it was steady and paid the bills. Our marriage was solid, though there was this one little snag that kept popping up. Greg had started writing to Catherine, and she happily wrote back. When I asked if this was really necessary, she got all defensive, saying, "Oh, Matt, don't be silly. He's just an old friend who's lonely in the Marines. I'm just trying to keep his spirits up." So, I had to accept that she was right, I guess. I knew full well they exchanged letters regularly. Neither her family nor I managed to convince her to stop writing until she got that letter telling her Greg had married a girl he met while stationed. That put an end to their correspondence, and I finally found some peace of mind. Over the next 3 years, she received just 3 Christmas cards from him, and that was it. During this break from Greg, our daughter, Jenna, was born. Catherine and I buckled down like a well-matched team, working hard to build a home and a secure future for Jenna. Back then, life was pretty good. We were in sync, raising and providing for our child. But as with most things in life, there was always something lurking around the corner ready to spoil it. One day, another letter arrived for Catherine, this time from Greg. She never mentioned it, but I did notice that our stash of stamps seemed to dwindle faster. I had a hunch that her eyes and heart were wandering back to him, but I decided to let it slide. After all, he was out there, supposedly keeping the world safe, while I was here making sure my family was protected from any kind of want. If they wanted to keep up their letter writing, it wasn't my business to interfere, no matter how uneasy it made me. Eventually, Catherine began to share bits and pieces of Greg's life with me. Apparently, he had divorced his first wife and was now married to another. He had seen combat and was, from what I gathered, highly decorated. I listened with only half my attention, while Catherine spoke about him with a sort of pride. At one point, she called him a soldier, and I corrected her, reminding her that he was a Marine and would probably be annoyed by that mistake. Catherine just giggled and said, "Oops, I guess I should be more careful with that." Watching her talk about him left me feeling pretty down, but I held on to the hope that, eventually, she'd get over him and put all her focus back on our family. That hope, however, never really came to pass. Greg stayed in the Marines for 30 years, married and divorced 3 times, and managed to collect enough medals to make General Patton look envious. It started to hit me hard that, over the years, while Greg had become more glamorous in my wife's eyes, I had only grown old and predictable. I hoped that once Greg left the Marines, he'd choose to settle down somewhere far from us. Unfortunately, he didn't, and that's how we ended up where we are now. Jenna, our daughter, grew up and eventually married a great guy named Frank Mitchell. The other big news is that they're expecting their first child. I'm now 60, looking forward to hitting that magical 65 so I can retire and spend my later years in peace. Catherine still looks stunning and can still make my heart race. Little did I know that my tranquility was about to be shattered. It happened on a Thursday. I came home to find Catherine all dressed up, telling me we had a dinner reservation for 7 o'clock. At first, I panicked, thinking I'd forgotten our anniversary or maybe her birthday, but after a quick mental check, I realized I hadn't missed anything. I decided to go with the flow, so I headed to our bedroom to freshen up and at least try to look like I belonged on the same level as Catherine. Dinner was fantastic, and the restaurant was packed, which made me think that Catherine had something on her mind besides just a nice meal. Near the end of our dinner, I looked her in the eyes and said, "All right, go ahead and drop the bomb. I'm in a good mood, and I won't cause a scene." One of my quirks is that I never lose my temper in public. Being in the insurance business, you learn to keep your cool no matter what, and that habit spilled over into my private life. Catherine knew this, so over the years, whenever she had something to tell me that she thought might upset me, she'd always choose a public place to break the news. Tonight, I sensed trouble just from the look on her face. 30 years of marriage gives you the ability to read your spouse like a book, and tonight, every signal she gave off was bad. I had this sinking feeling that whatever she was about to say would ruin my evening. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice laced with hesitation. "Matt, there's something you should know. Greg is back." A wave of nausea hit me, though it had nothing to do with the dinner we'd just had. I stared at her, waiting for the other shoe to drop, but Catherine just sat there, deep in thought. Unable to bear the silence any longer, I pressed, "When you say, back, do you mean he's on leave?" She shook her head slowly, almost painfully, before replying in a near whisper, "No, Matt, he's not on leave. He's been discharged, and he bought a house 2 streets away from us." Her words sent my panic into overdrive. I blurted out, "And he's living there with his third wife?" Catherine shook her head again, replying quietly, "No, he's divorced again, but this time he had to swallow some of his pride in the process." I tried to contain my anger, but it spilled out a little too loudly, drawing the curious eyes of nearby diners. My frustration wasn't about Greg losing face in his divorce, it was about him moving so close to us. I needed to understand why. I shifted into a more direct approach. "Catherine, have you seen him?" Her expression gave me the answer before she could even speak. Without waiting for a response, I threw out another question, "When and how?" She looked uneasy as she admitted, "He stopped by our house yesterday to let me know we're now neighbors." My heart raced as I pressed on, dreading what I might uncover. "Did you sleep with him again?" Her face was all the confirmation I needed before she stammered out, I did, Matt, but it's not what you think. I locked eyes with her, my voice dangerously low as I said, what I'm thinking, Catherine, is that my supposedly faithful wife slept with another man. So, go ahead, explain how that isn't what I think it is. She took a deep breath and replied, I did it because he needed me, Matt. When he came over, he looked so lost. He's dealing with PTSD, or something like it, and after the divorce, he was a wreck. I wanted to help him. I love you, but I realize now that I still love Greg, too. And there it was. My wife had slept with Greg, using PTSD and his divorce as excuses to let him back into her life, and her bed. I met her gaze, speaking more firmly than I ever had before in our marriage. All right, Catherine. What's done is done. We can move forward and rebuild, but you have to promise me that you will never sleep with him again. Do you understand? Her eyes filled with tears as she answered quietly, yet with a determination that chilled me. I can't promise that, Matt. I love him, and he needs me more than you do. I was floored by her words but knew full well that airing our dirty laundry here in a public restaurant wasn't an option. I called the waiter over and asked for the check. 10 minutes later, we were in the car on the way home. I pushed the issue again, my voice edged with desperation. Catherine, how could you sleep with him knowing I'm your husband? Didn't our vows mean anything to you? Do you remember the part about forsaking all others? She broke down then, openly sobbing. Between her tears, she choked out, I'm sorry, Matt, but he needs me, and we found each other again. I can't bear the idea of losing either of you. I was in shock. What could I possibly say or do to make her let him go? Anger surged within me, and I spoke louder than I intended. So, what now? Are we supposed to take turns? He gets you for New Year's, and I get you for Christmas. Come on, Catherine, you can't have two men. She stopped sniffling and gave me a look I couldn't quite read. What about a leave of absence, Matt? Now I was the one feeling confused. What in the world are you talking about, Catherine? She seemed to latch onto the idea. Listen, Matt, remember about 18 years ago when you took a leave from work to go back to school and earn your master's degree? You went, did what you had to do, then came back to your old job, and everything turned out fine. I shook my head in frustration. Catherine, how can you compare me getting a degree that benefited both the company and our family with this so-called leave of absence you're talking about, which only benefits the two of you? By now, I had pulled into our driveway and turned off the car's engine. Catherine reached over, gently touching my face as she pleaded. Matt, I missed out on my last year of high school with Greg. If I'd had that year with him, we might not be in this mess tonight. Give me that year, Matt. Let me get Greg out of my system, and I promise I'll be the best wife I can be for you. I need this time, Matt. Please. I was overwhelmed with sadness, hurt, and shock, and I made the worst mistake of my life by allowing this breach of trust. All right, Catherine, if that's really what you want, then go ahead and do what you please. But, and this is a huge but, don't expect me to support this. For that entire year, I don't want to see you or hear from you at all. Is that clear? I hoped that setting such harsh conditions might make her rethink this whole leave of absence, but it was a lost cause. She seemed to ignore everything I said after all right. Leaning over, she kissed my cheek, saying simply, thank you, Matt. You'll see. You won't regret this. I shook my head, muttering, too late. I already regret it. That night, she wanted to make love, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. The thought of her with Greg made me feel sick, and I wanted nothing to do with physical intimacy. As we were getting ready for bed, I grabbed my pillow and told her I was sleeping in the guest room. I saw the look of hurt flash across her face, and for a brief moment, I felt a bit of satisfaction, hoping that maybe now she'd reconsider where this leave of absence might lead. The next morning, I woke up hoping that the events of the previous night had been some strange anomaly and that Catherine would see things differently in the light of day. I was dead wrong. When I walked into the kitchen, there she was, cooking breakfast with the expression of someone who had just hit the jackpot. She flashed me a wide smile and pointed to the wall calendar. I couldn't help but notice that today's date, June 6th, was circled in thick black marker. I sat at the table, feeling the cruel irony of that date. In 1944, thousands of soldiers and sailors stormed the beaches of Normandy to free Europe from tyranny. Today, I was losing my wife to a different kind of conqueror. Catherine was practically bouncing with excitement as she brought my breakfast over. Placing the plate in front of me, she said, "I know you're worried, honey, but exactly 1 year from today, I'll come back, and I'll be yours and yours alone. I really need this time to sort through my feelings and get Greg out of my system. I promise you won't regret this." She was beaming as she continued, "I already called Greg this morning while you were still asleep. I told him you agreed to give me a leave of absence, and he'll be picking me up in an hour." With every word she spoke, I felt my heart sink deeper. I had to give it one last shot. "Catherine, you don't have to do this. Please, just take some more time to think it through before you make such a foolish decision. You can't be certain that a year will be enough to get over him. What you really need to do is put him out of your mind and focus on fixing our marriage. I'm begging you not to risk destroying what we have." She smiled at me in a way that made me feel like I was already dead to her. "Matt, I know how much you love me by giving me this time. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. In the end, I'll be back, and our marriage will be even stronger. Now, I have to finish packing, sweetheart, so go on and finish your breakfast." And just like that, she walked out of the kitchen and, for all practical purposes, out of our marriage too. I finished my breakfast, though I barely tasted a thing, and got up to get dressed. When I entered our bedroom, I saw that Catherine had packed 3 large suitcases full of clothes and toiletries. She gave me a sweet smile and said, "Looks like I've got everything I need. Could you be a dear and take these bags out to the porch for Greg?" I stared at her blankly before responding, no. The shock on her face was unmistakable. I followed up my refusal with a few steps toward the stairs. "If you're dead set on throwing away 30 years of marriage, then you can take your own bags out. I'm not about to help you head off to his bed. Got it?" Catherine looked like she was about to cry before she snapped back, "He's not a jerk. Greg is a wonderful man and a hero who served his country. That's more than you ever did." I turned away, muttering under my breath, "Yeah, he got medals, 3 square meals a day, and a ticket to travel the world while I spent 5 days a week at work, providing for you and our daughter. I guess you're right, that was nothing." She hauled each piece of luggage down to the driveway, shooting daggers at me with every trip. Not long after, a car pulled up, and out stepped a man who could only be Greg. He began loading her things from the porch into his car. Catherine called out that she'd be right there, then turned and came back inside to face me one last time. We stood there awkwardly until I broke the silence. "If you're really going to go through with this, remember the ground rules. I don't want to see you or hear from you for the entire year." I think it finally started to sink in what this was going to mean, as she replied meekly, "I understand, Matt, but this is going to work out. You'll see. Remember, you agreed to give me this year." She waited for me to say something, but I remained silent. Looking even more confused, she finally whispered, "I really do love you." She moved to kiss me on the lips, but I turned my head at the last moment, leaving her with just a brush on my cheek. I quickly muttered, "I can't kiss you, knowing you're going to him." Tears welled up in her eyes before she turned and ran out of the house straight into his arms. I stood in the doorway, watching as she kissed him deeply, and a surge of rage boiled up inside me. 2 minutes later, my driveway was as empty as my heart, and it hit me hard that my wife was now in another man's arms. I called in sick to work that morning and made my way to the hardware store to buy new locks. I spent the entire morning replacing the locks around the house and changing the security codes on the alarm system. If nothing else, it kept me occupied and my mind off Catherine, but as soon as I finished, the sadness crashed over me like a wave breaking on the shore. After that, I did what any man might do in my situation. I unplugged the house phone and proceeded to drown my sorrows in a bottle. What I went on wasn't just a bender, it was a desperate search for some kind of relief from the pain of losing Catherine. But it turned out to be a bust. My battle with the booze lasted until Sunday morning, when I finally ran out. In hindsight, it was probably a good thing. I felt like I was on the brink of death, physically, mentally, and spiritually. I stumbled into bed and fell into a deep sleep, only to be jarred awake later by a pounding sound somewhere in the house. I woke up slowly, stumbling around as I tried to locate the noise, which turned out to be my daughter, Jenna, banging on the front door. When I finally let her in, she looked shocked by my appearance and the stench of alcohol that filled the entire house. Her first words were, "Dad, what the hell is going on?" I squinted, trying to focus, but the pounding in my head made it nearly impossible. I managed to croak out, "What do you mean?" She stared at me like I'd grown a second head, and at that moment, I wondered if I had. She grabbed my arm and led me into the kitchen. "You need some coffee and food, Dad. After that, you're going to tell me what happened here." An hour later, with some food in my stomach and a mug of coffee in my hand, I explained everything I knew about her mother and Greg. Shocked would be putting it lightly. "Let me get this straight, Dad," she began. "Mom wants a year-long break from your marriage so she can reconnect with her high school sweetheart and let whatever happens, happen." I nodded, replying, "Yep, that pretty much sums it up." Her next question echoed the one I'd been asking myself since Friday. "So, what are you going to do, Dad?" I looked at her, and without even thinking, the words spilled out of my mouth. "Tomorrow, I'm calling in sick again, and I'm going to see a lawyer." She looked sad, almost as if trying to find a way to excuse her mother's actions. "I just can't believe Mom would do something like this. Could it be a mental breakdown?" I stared at her with a blank expression and answered flatly, "I have no idea, Jenna." She looked at me with a sorrow I'd never seen in her eyes before. "I don't know what to tell you, Dad. Part of me wants to ask you to think it over, but honestly, it seems like going to a lawyer is your best option." Jenna stayed for a few more hours, even preparing dinner for me to have later. As she was leaving, she kissed me on the cheek and apologized again. Before she walked out the door, I asked, "Why did you come by today, anyway?" She looked back at me and said, "Mom called. She asked me to check on you, but she never mentioned why or where she was." I nodded, pretending to understand when I really didn't. "All right, thanks, and drive safe, sweetheart." The next day, I called in sick and went to see a lawyer. The bottom line was that while a divorce for spousal abandonment would be a sure thing in my favor and could potentially prevent her from taking half of my retirement, the rest of our assets would still be up for grabs. For the first time, it dawned on me that Catherine's year-long absence might just be the opportunity one needed to minimize those losses. The next 3 weeks flew by. I was honestly surprised at how quickly I adapted to living alone. On the bright side, I felt a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders, not having to be responsible for another person. The downside, of course, was waking up and going to bed alone. I hadn't seen or heard from Catherine until mid-July. One Saturday, I decided to stop by Flynn's, the upscale tavern in town, for a few drinks. I was sitting at the bar when the two of them strolled in, holding hands like a pair of lovesick teenagers. They were so wrapped up in each other that they didn't even notice me sitting there. As I watched them, my focus shifted to Greg. He was well-built, with a moderately attractive face, and I could see why Catherine might be drawn to him. But what struck me most was how he seemed to dominate her. She catered to his every whim. When he spoke, she listened; when he moved, she adjusted to him in every possible way. It was like she revolved around his every action. When she got up to head to the ladies' room, she finally caught sight of me sitting at the bar and gave me a tentative smile. As she came out, she hesitated for a moment before walking over. "Hi, Matt. How have you been?" I wanted to tell her to get lost, but I kept my manners in check, forcing a smile before replying, "Oh, as well as one can when their wife of 30 years leaves them for some piece of trash. What can I do for you?" She seemed taken aback by my sarcasm but held her ground. "Matt, I need to get back into the house. I left some personal things there, and when I tried the other day, my key wouldn't work." I kept up my smile and replied in the friendliest tone I could muster, "Oh, wow, Catherine, sorry to hear that. But you shouldn't be surprised that your key doesn't work at my house anymore, considering you don't live there. As for getting back in, I don't think so, but thanks for asking." She stood there, looking completely bewildered, before I added, "You'd better hurry back to your boyfriend before he starts getting all worked up." I could see tears forming in her eyes as she quickly turned and walked away. I went back to my drink, which seemed far more important at that moment. Barely 2 minutes later, I felt a rough hand grab my shoulder and spin me around in my chair. I found myself face to face with an angry-looking Greg. "Hey, you made my girl cry," he growled. I could tell he was gearing up to punch me, and my heart started racing. This guy looked like he could take me down before anyone could step in. Summoning more confidence than I actually felt, I went on the offensive. "Hold on there, Spartacus. If anyone has a right to be mad, it's me. You're talking about your wife, not your girl, and since you stole her, you've got no right to interfere with what goes on between us. Now, listen up, you jerk. You can punch me and try to impress her, but how impressed do you think the cops will be?" I could see the wheels turning in his head, and I knew Greg wasn't exactly a genius. Still, it was enough to give me a boost to keep pressing on with my verbal assault. "Now, you've got two options. 1, you punch me and spend a year in jail, or 2, you back out of my face and go sit your dumb butt back down." My heart was hammering in my chest, and a voice in the back of my mind screamed, "Why are you provoking him? He'll kill you." But I maintained my facade of bravado as Greg stood there, mulling over his choices. Just then, the manager approached and asked what the problem was. Greg shot him a belligerent glance before grumbling, "Nothing," and slowly retreated. 5 minutes later, they paid their bill and left. As I drove home that night, I found myself wondering what personal thing Catherine was so eager to retrieve from the house. Determined to find out, I spent the next 3 hours going through cabinets and drawers, coming up empty, until I pulled out the drawers from her bureau. Hidden underneath were letters addressed to Catherine from Greg. As I read through them, it became clear that this year-long affair with Greg had been planned for a long time. One of the letters, dated 5 years ago, said, "It's such a relief to know you still want me as much as I want you. When I come home, I want us to be together, so you'll need to figure out how to get rid of that husband of yours." Reading through them was like flipping through a trashy adult novel. Most of the letters detailed either what he planned to do with Catherine or reminisced about their high school exploits. By the time I finished reading, I found it much easier to imagine life without Catherine. I didn't hear from Catherine again until September 1st, which happened to be my birthday. When I got home from work that day, I found a covered pot and a birthday card sitting on the porch. Bringing them inside, I discovered that she had made pot roast, my favorite. The card wished me a happy birthday, but inside, she had written a message, "Matt, I know we aren't supposed to communicate, but I couldn't just ignore the birthday of the man I love so much. I dream about us every night, my love, and I know that when this year ends, I'll be yours completely, and he'll be out of our lives. Please, don't stop loving me or give up on us. Love, Kath." Since Kath had left, my daughter Jenna had been keeping close tabs on me, and she called to wish me a happy birthday. After some small talk, she finally got to the real reason for her call. "Dad, you remember my due date is in 3 weeks, right?" How could I forget? The birth of my first grandchild was a big deal. Yes, of course, sweetie. You and Frank must be over the moon with excitement. There was a brief silence, and I braced myself for what was coming. Then she said, Dad, Frank and I had dinner with Mom and Greg recently. Mom wants to be there when the baby is born, and she wants Greg to be with her. I know you and Mom agreed not to communicate during this year, but could you make an exception for me, just this once? Please. I was a bit stunned to hear that Jenna and her husband had been out dining with those two, but I wasn't going to let it ruin the arrival of my first grandchild. All right, Jenna, she can come, and if she has to bring him along, then so be it. She immediately corrected me. Dad, stop calling him names. He's really not that bad of a guy, and he makes Mom so happy. I haven't seen her this euphoric in years. That hit me hard, and anger quickly surged up. Oh, I see. First, you're all having dinner together, and now you're defending him. Whatever he's got, I wish I could bottle it. Looks like he's on track to take my whole family away from me. Just curious, when are you planning to start calling him Dad? Jenna responded quickly, and I could hear the regret in her voice. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to sound like that. I can't even imagine how you must be feeling, and I really am sorry. I cut off her apology, my tone icy. It's fine. Forget it. Look, I've got some stuff on the stove I need to deal with, alright? She said she loved me and hung up. It was then I realized that my life was never going to be the same again, and it was high time I started fighting back. Step 1, start liquidating my assets to lower my net worth. Step 2, get out of this slump and start living again. The next few days were busy. First, I got some legal advice from my attorney on how to handle my assets. Next, I picked up a bit of personal protection in the form of a taser, just in case Greg decided to come at me again. I wasn't planning on talking my way out of it next time. Third, I booked a trip to Vegas for October. And fourth, I went online to look for a woman my age who was interested in a good man for a stable, long-term relationship. As far as my assets were concerned, I could spend them or even give them away. Since my wife wasn't living with me, I apparently had free rein to disperse our assets however I saw fit. This newfound flexibility opened up a range of options for my future plans. When Jenna gave birth, I was at work, and my secretary took the call. It was from her husband, Frank, who was thrilled to tell me that I now had a grandson. I congratulated him and assured him I'd be there shortly. When I got to the hospital, I asked which room Jenna was in and headed straight for it. Just as I approached the door, I overheard her and Catherine talking inside. Mom, what you're doing to Dad is absolutely senseless. Are you really willing to lose him for Greg? Jenna's voice was filled with frustration. Catherine's tone, however, was calm and soothing. Don't get worked up, Jenna. I'm not going to lose your father. He loves me far too much to let me go. Besides, what I have with Greg right now is like magic. It's hard to put into words, but every day feels just like high school all over again, only now, we can actually be together. He treats me like a princess, and every night, he takes care of me. I've never experienced anything so wonderful in my life. I know I'll truly miss it when I go back to your father. Jenna sounded disgusted. Mom, I really don't want to hear about you and Greg's relationship. Yes, he's a great guy, and you two do seem to fit together well, but I want my baby to have grandparents who are together, not divorced or constantly bickering. Please, Mom, you need to go back to Dad, and you need to do it for his sake. He might be boring, predictable, and definitely not as exciting as Greg, but he'll always be there for you. Greg might be a dreamboat, but all boats sail off sooner or later. Dad, on the other hand, is a rock. He'll never leave you if you make this right. Beg him on your knees if you have to, but get him to take you back. She paused for a moment, her voice becoming more earnest. Mom, don't wait too long, or you might lose him. Catherine's response made it clear just how deluded she was. You don't need to worry about your dad and me. When the time comes that I'm ready to move on from Greg, he'll gladly take me back. Jenna's tone grew more skeptical. You might think you know Dad, but I've seen and talked to him, and he's changing. It's not for the better, either. He seems bitter and more distant since you left. Are you seriously willing to risk 30 years of marriage just for some fling with your high school crush? I'd heard enough, so I chose that moment to step into the room and, with a forced smile, said, Hey there, Mommy. Congratulations on your new son. You two must be thrilled. I walked over to give Jenna a hug, completely ignoring Catherine. Immature, maybe, but it was getting easier for me to do. Catherine shot me a dirty look, but Jenna was beaming as she asked, Have you seen him yet, Dad? I shook my head. No, sweetheart, I came straight up to check on how you're doing. Catherine, clearly fed up with being snubbed, interjected in a less-than-friendly tone, Hello, Matt. How have you been? I glanced at her briefly, replying in a polite yet detached manner, Fine. Then I turned back to Jenna, asking her about the delivery and if they'd decided on a name for the baby. At that question, Jenna's face lit up, and she joyfully announced, Frank and I both agreed that we want to name him Thompson after you, Dad. It was at that moment that Catherine silently left the room, saying she was going to see the baby. Once she was gone, I took Jenna's hands in mine, my tone turning serious. Jenna, you probably already know that your mom and I aren't going to make it. I could see my words hit her like a punch. No, Dad, don't say that. She'll come around soon and come back home. I felt my eyes misting up as I continued, Sweetheart, I've come to realize that I was never enough for your mother. It explains why she kept writing to Greg all these years. Jenna's face showed pure shock and disbelief. What? I managed a sad smile. Over the next few months, I'm going to start the divorce process, but I need to sort a few things out first. She began to cry as she replied, Oh, Dad, I told Mom she should be begging you to take her back, but I guess it really is too late, isn't it? I nodded in agreement. Yes, I can't take her back now. The memories of her betrayal would be too much to handle. But please, don't say anything to her just yet, all right? Jenna nodded and then pulled me down to give me a kiss. We spent a few more minutes chatting about various things, carefully avoiding any mention of my wife or her boyfriend. Eventually, I told her I'd be back tomorrow and headed out to see the baby. I made my way to the nursery and found my grandson among the tiny, swaddled babies. I was overwhelmed by how small and precious he was, absolutely beautiful. Frank quickly came over, positioning himself between me and Catherine and Greg, a smile plastered on his face. He handed me a cigar. Here, Dad, have a smoke to celebrate. I gratefully accepted, tucking it into my pocket. Thanks, son. I'll save it for later. Watching my wife and her lover holding hands like two high school kids made my stomach turn. Listen, Frank, I'll come back tomorrow when it's less crowded, if you catch my drift. Frank nodded knowingly. I get it, Dad, and I don't blame you one bit. Just as I was about to leave, Catherine sheepishly called out, Matt, doesn't it feel like just yesterday we were bringing our own baby home? Now she's got a baby of her own. I don't know where all the time went, but it went way too fast. I glanced over at her, still clasping Greg's hand, and replied as neutrally as possible, Well, Kath, it looks like you two now have all the time in the world. She looked confused as I turned and walked away. October rolled around, and it turned out to be the best month I'd had since Catherine left. I took a trip to Vegas, planning to lose some money at the tables as a way to drain our joint assets. But what made the trip truly memorable was meeting a woman while I was there. Her name was Miranda, a mature woman in her 50s. I was a bit surprised that she was still in that line of work, but she explained that many men prefer an older woman, and in my case, she was spot on. Miranda was expensive, but she made me feel more alive than I had in years. For the first time since Kath had left, I didn't miss her at all. Miranda was wonderful, both as company and in more intimate moments. She showed genuine interest in my situation, gathering all the details about my soon-to-be ex-wife and her new lover. By the end of the night, she seemed to know as much about me as I did. Miranda was taken aback by my story, and as she was leaving that evening, she gently touched my face. "Matt, I've only known you a few hours, but I need to tell you something. You're a good man, and that's a rare quality. Trust me, I know. I've seen and been with thousands of men, and I can count on one hand the ones I truly liked and respected. You're one of them. Your wife has no idea what she's throwing away. Just remember one thing, don't let her actions change who you are. Your honesty and goodness are your strengths. Don't lose them. And if you ever come back to town, call me. I'd really like to see you again." Miranda and my trip to Vegas left me more conflicted than I was when I arrived. I mulled over her words and realized she had a point. I had been planning to ruin Catherine for what she did to me, but the truth was, she had been a good wife and mother for 30 years before this betrayal. No, I would be fair. I'd walk away from this marriage a broke man, but an honest one. When I got back from Vegas, I instructed my lawyer to start drawing up the divorce paperwork, aiming to file by the end of the year. I also decided it was time to dig a little deeper into Greg's past. On my lawyer's advice, I hired a firm to uncover everything about Greg, from his high school days to his present life. The firm was pricey, but I didn't mind since half of the cost would ultimately come out of Catherine's share. They had a solid reputation for thoroughness and assured me they'd have all the information I needed before Christmas. In the meantime, I approached my boss about the possibility of relocating within the company. He was stunned, considering I'd always sworn I'd never move, but that was back when I still had a family. He promised to make some inquiries at the main office and get back to me. Next up was Thanksgiving, another hurdle I needed to cross. About a week before the holiday, Jenna called to invite me over for dinner. When I asked if her mother and the other guy would be there, she hesitated before admitting they would. Hearing that, I firmly declined and hung up. To my surprise, it was Frank who reached out to me next. He called my office and asked if we could meet up. We settled on a time in a bar downtown, convenient for both of our workplaces, where we could have a quiet drink. That evening, I could tell right away that he was agitated. After the usual pleasantries, I ordered 2 scotches. I had a feeling something was really bothering him, so I sat back and listened as Frank started to fill me in on what was happening with Catherine and Jenna. "Dad, you wouldn't believe it. It's Greg this and Greg that. You'd think he was that guy from the beer commercials, the most interesting man in the world." He paused to take a sip of his drink. I had initially thought he'd come to convince me to join them for Thanksgiving, but now I wasn't so sure. I had to ask, "So, Frank, am I right to assume you're not a fan of the esteemed Mr. Harris?" Frank's face darkened with anger. "Dad, the man is an arrogant, self-absorbed blowhard. He's so in love with himself that I don't know how he has anything left over for Catherine." Realizing what he'd just said, his expression turned crestfallen, and he quickly backtracked. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean any disrespect." I offered him a small smile. "It's fine, son. But tell me, when did you stop calling her mom and start using Catherine instead?" He looked down, clearly troubled. "The day she left you. I haven't had any respect for her since then. That piqued my interest. Why does it bother you so much that she left me, if you don't mind me asking?" His face flushed with anger again. "You probably noticed that I never talk about my parents, and I always appreciated that you never asked. The truth is, my mom cheated on my dad. They split up afterward, and my dad never recovered. He drank himself into an early grave, and my mom and her lover died in a car wreck. I hate cheaters. Now that Catherine's become one, I can barely stand to be around her. I keep up appearances for Jenna's sake, but I'm worried. I had never known this part of Frank's past, and my heart ached for him. But I was also puzzled about the source of his worry. Frank, you say you're worried. What exactly is bothering you, son? He took a long swig of his drink and signaled for another round before turning back to me. I'm probably going to upset you, but you know the old saying, like mother, like daughter. It scares me. If Catherine has turned into a cheater and keeps gushing to my wife about how wonderful it is, how long before Jenna starts thinking about trying it out for herself? We've already got one cheater. How long before we have two? My eyebrows shot up at that. I get where you're coming from, Frank. I took a long sip from my drink, mulling over my next move. Listen, don't get too discouraged. I've got a few irons in the fire, and I think things might start turning around by the new year. And just between us, I've got some plans in the works that should make Christmas enjoyable for you and Jenna, though maybe not so much for some others, if you catch my drift. For the first time since we sat down at the bar, Frank cracked a smile and spent the next 15 minutes trying to pry more information out of me, but I stayed tight-lipped. As we wrapped up, I grinned. Didn't you forget something, Frank? He looked puzzled. Not that I can think of, Dad. I patted him on the shoulder. Aren't you supposed to try to convince me to be the bigger man and join you for Thanksgiving? A wide grin spread across Frank's face like a flood breaking through a dam. Sure, all right. So, are you coming for Thanksgiving, Dad? I shook my head with a firm no, but I appreciate the invite. Jenna called me 2 more times before Thanksgiving, pleading for me to come, until I finally laid it out for her. Look, Jenna, when your mother left me for that man last June, I made it clear there'd be no communication between us for the entire year she wanted away from our marriage. I already broke that rule once for little Thompson's birth, but I'm not going to break bread with them. Do you understand? Thanksgiving came, and I ended up having a frozen dinner by myself. Sure, I felt lonely and sad, but it was better than watching Catherine and Greg making eyes at each other across the table. Then December rolled in, bringing with it the shadow of yet another family holiday. I dreaded it but found some solace in knowing it would be the last one I'd have to endure like this. December turned out to be a productive month. First, my company offered me a position in Spokane, Washington, starting in January, and I immediately expressed my interest. Second, the private investigator's report on Mr. Harris came in, and it was quite the bombshell. It turns out that Greg had 3 ex-wives, all of whom divorced him for cheating, plus 2 children from other women, for whom he was still paying child support. To top it off, his last wife managed to snag half of his pension in their divorce. The cherry on this mess. Greg had been demoted from E8 to E6 during his last year in the Marines. In short, his finances and moral standing were in pretty rough shape. And the final piece of good news? Catherine would be served with divorce papers on the first working day after Christmas. I was definitely feeling the holiday spirit now. I called Jenna to ask about the Christmas plans, and once again, she begged me to make the baby's first holiday a real family gathering. I asked if Greg would be there, and Jenna got irritated. Dad, you might as well get used to it. He's part of our family now, whether you like it or not. I cut her off sharply. You're right, I don't like it. But for the baby's sake, I'll be there. Jenna seemed genuinely happy, exclaiming, "Thank you, Daddy. This will make everyone so happy." I had a feeling it wouldn't quite turn out that way, but who was I to spoil their fun? 2 days later, I came home from work to a ringing phone and, without thinking, picked it up. Hello. There was an awkward silence on the other end, and I was about to hang up when a voice finally spoke. Matt. I felt like I'd been hit with a sledgehammer. What's wrong, Kath? Are you okay? Her voice was timid as she replied, No, I'm fine, Matt, but I wanted to thank you for agreeing to come to Christmas. I know I've hurt you, and I'm starting to realize just how much. I just needed to tell you how grateful I am. We haven't been apart for any holiday in 30 years. I was miserable at Thanksgiving without you, and I've been thinking a lot about us lately. I cut into her trip down memory lane. Well, Catherine, it's good to know you actually think about us once in a while. But I need to remind you that when you started this whole leave of absence nonsense, I made it clear that there'd be no communication between us. I've already bent that rule for one day, Christmas. So, I think it's best we end this call now. Goodbye. As I hung up, a wave of guilt washed over me. I had never spoken to her that harshly in all our 30 years together. But as bad as I felt for my words, it still didn't compare to how terrible I felt the day she walked out on me. The month dragged on, and I managed to get my Christmas shopping done with plenty of time to spare. I made sure to buy gifts for everyone to open on Christmas Day. I also packed up everything I'd be taking to my new job and rented a U-Haul for the cross-country drive. During this time, I spoke to a friendly woman at my new office, who said she'd found a couple of nice furnished apartments close by. The best part? She offered to show them to me when I arrived in Spokane. Yes, things were finally starting to look up for me. Christmas Day came, and I arrived at Jenna and Frank's place, only to find that Catherine and her other were already there. Jenna ran over and gave me a big hug as I walked in with a bag full of presents. She made a comment about what a surprise it was, then hurried back to finish preparing dinner. I just smiled, thinking, if only she knew what kind of surprise it would be. Frank shook my hand and took my coat as I quickly asked, "Mind if I see my grandson?" He nodded and said the baby was napping in the nursery, but I could peek in if I wanted. I crept in quietly and gazed down at the tiny, sleeping form. A river of emotions rushed through me, knowing I'd be leaving him soon, but also realizing I couldn't stay. I sensed movement behind me and turned to see Catherine silently standing at my side. The irony wasn't lost on me, this was exactly where she should have been since June. She looked over at me and whispered, "He's beautiful, Matt, our grandson." Sadness welled up inside me as I replied, "Yes, Catherine, but the real question is, who will he grow up calling Grandpa, me or both of us?" She looked surprised by the question. "What are you talking about?" "Of course, you're the only grandfather this child will ever have." I mumbled quietly, "Let's hope you're right, Catherine," before walking out of the room. The next few hours were interesting, to say the least. Frank and I chatted a bit while Jenna, Catherine, and Greg seemed to exist in their own little bubble. I was disappointed at how easily my daughter had fallen under Greg's spell. Frank looked disgusted, but I whispered to him to hang tight because things were about to change that evening. A spark lit up in his eyes as he replied conspiratorially, "I hope so, Dad. I can't stand much more of this. At this rate, he'll be making a move on Jenna soon." Dinner was served, and while the food was delicious, the company was sorely lacking. I didn't see any reason to engage in conversation with my wife or her companion, and Frank seemed equally reluctant. The only one who kept talking was Greg, regaling the women with exaggerated tales of his courage and bravery in the face of danger. Watching him play to his two-woman fan club made my stomach turn. After dinner, Jenna brought the baby into the living room, and we all sat down together. I looked around at my family, fully aware that this scene would likely never play out again in my lifetime. Jenna seemed genuinely happy as she excitedly told Frank to bring in the gifts. He did so, and she began handing them out to her mom, Greg, and me. Catherine received a sweater, Greg got a gift card, and I ended up with a tie. Practical or dull gifts, much like how my wife and daughter probably viewed me. When Jenna, Frank, and the baby opened their gifts from Catherine and Greg, there were smiles and laughter from Jenna, though Frank was polite but clearly distant. Once they finished opening their presents, the room fell silent as they all turned their attention to me and my bag of gifts. Breaking the silence, I finally said, "I want to wrap up this wonderful day by giving each of you the gifts you truly deserve this holiday." Standing up, I grabbed the bag and handed a large envelope wrapped in festive paper to Jenna and Frank. Jenna ripped off the wrapping, while Frank stood by, watching. As she pulled out the papers inside and scanned them, a scream of joy erupted from her. Catherine leaned forward on her seat, clearly anxious to know what the papers were. Jenna wasted no time in sharing the news, shouting, "Oh my gosh, Dad gave us your house free and clear. We can finally move out of that rental. Isn't it amazing?" Catherine's face fell as she turned to me with concern. "Why did you do that, Matt? Where are we going to live?" I gave her a calm, reassuring look, hoping to ease her worry. "Don't fret, Catherine. I've got it all figured out. Here, this is for you." I handed her a card and a small box. Hope flickered in her eyes as she tore away the bright paper and opened the box to find a bracelet. With astonishment on her face, she picked it up. I spoke softly, "Check the inside, Catherine." I had it inscribed. I noticed Greg wasn't pleased about me giving her a gift. She slowly turned the bracelet over and read the words, "Thank you for the best 30 years of my life. Matt." I glanced at Greg, who was still scowling at the sight of my gift. Catherine looked confused. "Matt, thank you. It's beautiful, but I noticed you didn't write 'love' in the inscription." I smiled gently. "I'm sorry about that, Kath, but I didn't want to lie. My love for you has been fading steadily over the past few months. This bracelet is my way of saying goodbye and a reminder of what you sacrificed for your happiness. I also need to let you know that you will be served with divorce papers on Monday." The room fell into a stunned silence. I could hear Jenna's sharp intake of breath as Catherine's face crumpled in shock and despair. I nodded toward the card in her hand. Inside the card, I've tried to express my gratitude for the many wonderful years we shared and for the amazing daughter you gave me. You'll also find a check for half of our liquid assets. As for the house, it was mine to give since you willingly left the marriage. It's all explained in the card. I turned my gaze to Greg, who looked ready to burst like a volcano. "This next gift is for both of you." I handed Catherine another large envelope, noticing how shaken she was. "Inside, you'll find a complete history of what your partner here has been up to since you two parted ways in high school. It seems he never quite learned the Marine motto, Semper Fidelis. I think you'll find it an eye-opening read." Before I could finish my sentence, Greg roared and lunged at me, his face twisted in rage. "I'll kill you, you son of a..." But he never got the chance to lay a hand on me. He hit the floor hard as my taser struck him squarely. Jenna jumped up, and Catherine gasped, but I gave Greg another zap just to ensure he stayed down for a while. Leaning in close, I whispered, "Hurts, doesn't it? Well, let me tell you, your pain is nothing compared to losing the woman you loved for 30 years to someone like you." Catherine was sobbing like it was the end of the world as I turned back to her. "I know you think I'm boring and don't care for you like your Sergeant York here," I said, shooting a glance at Greg. I gave him another zap with the taser, just because I enjoyed watching him convulse. Grinning wickedly, I added, "to no one in particular, now that never gets old." I looked back at Catherine, my heart shattered, but I forced more bravado into my voice than I truly felt. "Anyway, I know how you feel about this man, so I'm giving you the best gift of all, Catherine, your freedom. Now, you can spend the rest of your life being pampered like a princess by day and having all your needs attended to at night. Isn't that what you always wanted?" She looked utterly stunned, managing to stammer, "No, this wasn't how it was supposed to go. I was planning to come back to you in June, Matt. I love you." Catherine was shaking like a leaf in a hurricane when Jenna rushed to her side, trying to comfort her. Meanwhile, I pressed the taser into Greg once more, just for good measure. Frank, visibly nervous, quickly interjected, "You better stop that. You might seriously hurt him." I straightened up, looking down at my convulsing adversary and then at the two women I had loved more than anything. "Well, I'm leaving now. Thanks for such a wonderful day, and I hope you all have a great life. I won't be seeing either of you for quite some time." Both Catherine and Jenna stared at me, utterly speechless, as if they didn't recognize who I was anymore. Frank retrieved my coat, handing it to me with a satisfied smile. Before walking out, I turned to my daughter, seeing fear in her eyes for the first time in her life. "Jenna, let this be a warning. If you turn into someone you're not, there will be consequences." I then stepped over to the bassinet where little Tommy lay, looking up at me. I gently rubbed his cheek with my finger. "Goodbye, little man. Maybe I'll see you around, though I have a feeling I probably won't." Still wearing a smile, I headed for the door. Turning back to the subdued room, I simply said, "Happy New Year, everyone." As I made my way to my car, I heard a scream of "no" echo from inside the house. Maybe the shock had worn off, or perhaps Greg was starting to come around. I got into my car, started the engine, and thought to myself that Vegas was sort of on the way to Spokane. I wouldn't mind seeing Miranda again. As I backed out of the driveway, Frank came outside, smiling and waving at me. I returned the wave before driving west toward a new life.